Let me tell you something first, before we even get to the part everyone always asks about. Nobody who was there that morning remembers the gunfire first. They remember the heat. It was one of those London mornings that pretends to be something it isn't. The sky was that flat, milky white you get in late summer, and the air just sort of sat on your shoulders. No wind, no movement, the kind of stillness that makes pigeons walk instead of fly. I was standing near the black iron railings outside the eastern gate of the palace grounds. I won't say which palace. You'll understand why later, selling cold water out of a little cart I'd been running for 6 years. £2 a bottle, 3 if you wanted it from the bottom of the ice. People complained, then paid anyway. Tourists always do. And there were a lot of tourists that day. I want you to picture it properly because the picture is the whole thing. It's everything. There must have been 4, maybe 500 people pressed up against those railings. Families, school groups in matching yellow caps, a man in a wheelchair with a little flag taped to the armrest, honeymoon couples taking photos of each other taking photos, a pair of Japanese students laughing so hard one of them dropped her phone and didn't even notice for a full minute. Everyone was waiting for the same thing, the changing of the guard. If you've never seen it, here's the thing you need to know. It's not a quick little event, it's a whole ceremony. Bearskin hats, red tunics, the band, the slow march, the boots hitting the stone in perfect time. People wait an hour, sometimes 2, just to see it. They get there early. They bring snacks. They argue about who gets the front spot at the railing. And standing at her post that morning, behind the gate, was a guard I'd seen maybe 100 times before but never once thought about. I'm going to call her Elena. That wasn't her name. But it's the name I think of when I think of her now, and I've earned the right to call her something gentle. She was small, that's the first thing. Smaller than you'd expect for someone in that uniform. The bearskin hat made everyone look enormous, but she had this way of standing that made you forget her size completely. Dead still. Eyes forward, not a flicker. I used to think those guards were almost like statues, like they'd been switched off somewhere inside. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things that day. Now here's where I have to slow down because the people who tell this story too fast always get it wrong. They skip to the loud part. They want the bang. They want the count. But the truth is, the danger was already there long before anyone knew it. It was walking through the crowd. It was buying water from me. There was a man. I served him around 10 in the morning. I remember him because he didn't smile, and almost everyone smiles when you hand them something cold on a hot day. It's automatic, a reflex. This man just took the bottle, looked at me for a second too long, and walked off toward the railings. He was wearing a coat. I want you to think about that. A long coat. In that heat. I noticed it the way you notice a wrong note in a song you know, not consciously, not in a way I could have explained, but something in the back of my head went, "That's odd," and then immediately forgot about it, because the world is full of odd people and I had 30 more bottles to sell. I've thought about that coat every single day since. There were others too, I know that now, I didn't then. They came in from different directions, spread out. 1 near the band's marching path, 2 by the western corner where the crowd was thinnest, a few right up against the gate. They didn't look at each other. They didn't talk. They just drifted into position like water finding the low ground. 25 of them. You could have walked right past every single one of them and felt nothing. I did. I sold 3 of them water. The band started up around 10:30. I remember the music swelling, that big brassy sound that bounces off the stone and fills your chest whether you want it to or not. The crowd pressed forward. Phones went up. A little boy on his father's shoulders started clapping, completely off the beat, and the people around him laughed. Elena hadn't moved. Of course she hadn't, that was the job. But I was close enough to the gate to see something the crowd couldn't. And I keep coming back to it. Because it's the moment everything changed and almost nobody noticed. Her eyes moved. Just once. just a fraction. Down and to the left toward the western corner, then back to center. If you weren't watching her face, and why would you be, with the whole spectacle right there, you'd have missed it entirely. But I saw it, and I saw her jaw tighten. This tiny, almost invisible thing, a muscle moving under the skin. She'd seen something. I followed her eyeline as best I could, and all I saw was the crowd. People, coats, bags, a normal mass of humanity sweating in the sun, nothing that made sense. But she knew, somehow before any of us she knew. I've spent a long time wondering what that's like. To stand perfectly still, surrounded by hundreds of people who think they're safe, and to be the only one who feels the floor tilting. She couldn't shout, couldn't break formation, not without a reason she could name. If she'd run from her post screaming, what would have happened? Panic. A stampede. 500 people crushing each other against iron railings over a feeling, a hunch, a coat that was probably nothing. So she did the hardest thing a person can do. She waited. She stood there and she let it come, because moving too soon would have been its own kind of disaster, and she knew it. I can't imagine the weight of those seconds. Knowing, waiting, holding still while every cell in your body is screaming at you to run. The band reached the loud part. The crowd cheered. Somewhere a baby started crying and its mother bounced it, laughing, embarrassed. And the man in the coat reached into his jacket. I want to stop here for a moment, not for effect, because I have to. Everyone wants to hear about the rifle, about the number, 25. It's in the title of everything they've ever written about that day, like it's the only thing that matters. But I knew those people in the crowd. Not all of them, but I knew the kind of them. I'd been handing them water for 6 years. The honeymooners. The kid clapping offbeat. The man in the wheelchair with the flag on his armrest. When people ask me about that day, they always lean in for the violence. I want you to lean in for them first. Because in about 90 seconds, every one of those 500 people was going to find out how close the worst thing in the world had walked, smiling, right past them. And the only person standing between them, and it was a woman so small you'd lose her in a doorway, holding a rifle most of them assumed was just for show. It wasn't for show. The first sound wasn't a gunshot. I need you to understand that, because every film gets it wrong. In films, the first shot is huge. It cracks the world in half. Everybody freezes, everybody knows. Real life isn't like that. The first sound was a scream. One scream from somewhere near the western corner, high and short, cut off almost before it started. And the strange thing is, half the crowd didn't even react. A scream at a tourist event. People scream when they're excited. People scream when somebody steps on their foot. A few heads turned. Most didn't. Then the man in the coat, my man, the one who didn't smile, pulled the front of his jacket open. I was maybe 15 feet from him. I saw the strap across his shoulder. I saw the dark metal. And my brain, my stupid, slow brain, spent a full second trying to tell me it was something else. A camera, a tripod, a prop, anything. It wasn't. He raised it toward the gate, toward the railings, toward the 400 or 500 people packed shoulder to shoulder with nowhere to go. And that's when the world finally cracked in half. I won't pretend I remember the next part in order. Nobody does. The mind doesn't record chaos like a video. It records it like broken glass, pieces, sharp ones out of sequence, some of them missing entirely. I remember the sound being wrong, not a bang, more like the air itself was being torn, fast, ugly, mechanical. I remember the cart going over. I think I knocked it myself. Bottles of water rolling everywhere, fanning out across the pavement, and somewhere in my head, a small, ridiculous voice going, "That's 200 quid. That's 200 quid of stock." I remember the boy, the one who'd been clapping off the beat on his father's shoulders. I remember the father turning his whole body, putting himself between the boy and the noise without even seeming to decide to. People do that. In the worst second of their lives, People do that without thinking. And I remember the crowd becoming one thing. That's the part I can't describe properly. 500 separate people, all strangers, all having their own little morning. And then in one breath they stopped being people and became a single animal. A huge, panicking, screaming animal trying to move in every direction at once and getting nowhere because there was nowhere. Railings on one side, each other on every other side. People went down. Not shot, just down, knocked, trampled, falling over the ones who'd already fallen. The man in the wheelchair. I lost sight of him. I've never found out. I don't let myself think about it too long. It was, for about 4 seconds, the most helpless I have ever felt in my life. And then through all of it, I saw her move. Elena. She'd been a statue for 2 hours. Now she came alive so fast it didn't look human. She didn't run from the threat. Understand that. Every instinct in every body in that square was pulling away from the man with the coat. Hers pulled the other way. She broke from her post. 3 steps. Her rifle came up off her shoulder and into her hands in one motion, smooth, practiced, like it was something her body had done 10,000 times in the dark so that it could do it once in the light. And then she did the thing I will never forget. She put herself in the line. She stepped between the crowd and the man in the coat, a small woman in a red tunic between 500 people and the thing that was trying to kill them. She made herself the target, on purpose, because every second he was looking at her was a second he wasn't looking at the families behind the railings. I heard her shout something, one word, I couldn't make it out over the screaming. Could have been down, could have been stop. Could have been nothing, just a sound, the kind of sound that comes out of you when you've decided. The man in the coat turned toward her. And she was already moving. Here's a thing they never tell you, and I only understood it later, talking to a soldier who'd seen real fighting. In a crowd, the worst thing a defender can do is fire wildly. One panicked shot in the wrong direction, and you've killed the very people you're trying to save. Behind that man in the coat were hundreds of bodies. Behind Elena were hundreds more. So she couldn't just shoot. She had to be certain of her angle, of her background, of exactly where every round would go if it missed. In the middle of the loudest, most terrifying moment of her life, with people falling and screaming all around her, she had to do mathematics. And she did. She dropped to a knee lower angle, cleaner background, the stone wall of the gate behind the man instead of the crowd. She brought the rifle up, and in the half second before she fired, I swear, her face wasn't afraid. It was sad. I've turned that over 1,000 times. Why sad? Why, in that second, of all the things a person could feel? I think, and I might be wrong, I'm only a man who sells water. I think she already knew what this was going to cost her. Not her life. Something else. Something quieter that you carry afterward. I think she knew she was about to do a thing that would change what kind of person she was, and that she was doing it anyway for strangers, because that was the job, and the job was the whole point of her. Then she fired. The man in the coat went down. One shot. He folded. The torn air sound from his weapon stopped just like that, and into the gap rushed every scream in the square at once. For half a second, I thought it was over. It wasn't over, it was barely beginning. Because the man in the coat had never been alone. Off to the western corner, a second figure was already raising something. Near the band, a third. By the thin part of the crowd, 2 more moving together. They'd been waiting, spread out, patient. The first man was just the opening note. 24 of them left. And Elena, still down on one knee, the echo of her first shot not even finished bouncing off the stone, turned her head and saw exactly what I saw. She saw the rest of them. I watched it land on her, just for an instant, the size of it, the hopelessness of the math. One small woman, 1 rifle, and a square full of people she could not abandon, and an enemy she could not possibly count fast enough. Anyone else would have run. anyone sane, anyone who wanted to live. She took a breath, and she stood back up. There's a question people ask me, and they always ask it the same way, leaning in a little, like they already know the answer and just want to hear me say it. Wasn't she terrified? And I always tell them the truth, which disappoints them every time. I don't know. I don't know what was inside her. Nobody does. I can only tell you what the outside looked like, and the outside looked like the calmest thing in a square full of screaming. Maybe she was terrified. Probably she was. The brave ones usually are, that's what makes it brave. But whatever fear she had, she'd put it somewhere I couldn't see, in some locked room at the back of herself, and she'd shut the door on it so she could work. Because now she had to work. The second attacker, the one near the western corner, opened fire before Elena was even fully on her feet. But here's the thing, and this is where you start to understand what kind of person you were dealing with. He fired at her. Not at the crowd, at her. She'd done that on purpose. By stepping into the open, by dropping the first man in plain sight of everyone, she'd made herself the most interesting thing in the square. To men like that, a guard with a rifle isn't a person. It's the obstacle. It's the thing that has to die first. And every one of them who turned to deal with her was a man who, for those few seconds, stopped pointing his weapon at a child. She knew that. That was the whole plan, if you can call something built in 2 seconds a plan. Make them come for me. So they did. And she made them pay for it. I lost my footing somewhere in here. Got knocked sideways by a man twice my size trying to climb the railing, and I went down hard onto the spilled water and the rolling bottles, and for a few seconds all I could see was legs and pavement. Which, strangely, is the clearest I saw any of it. Because from down there, looking up through the chaos, I could see her feet. She never stopped moving. That's what I remember from the ground, those black boots, never still, never planted for more than a breath. Step, turn, drop, rise, step. She was using the gate, the pillars, a stone planter, anything solid, anything that would put a wall behind a bad guy instead of a crowd. She was reading the whole square like a board, and she was always putting herself in the spot where her line of fire ran into stone and not into people. I didn't understand it then. I thought she was just dodging. She wasn't dodging, she was choosing. Every single time she pulled that trigger, she had already decided where the round would go if she was wrong. That's not bravery. Bravery's the easy part. That's discipline, the kind you can't fake and can't rush, the kind that gets built over years of someone yelling at you on a cold parade ground while you wonder what the point of it all is. That morning, in about 90 seconds, every boring drill she'd ever hated became the reason a stranger's children kept breathing. The western man dropped, then the one by the band. The band, by the way, I have to tell you about the band, because it breaks my heart a little. When the shooting started, most of them ran. Of course they did. They were musicians, not soldiers, but 2 of them didn't. 2 of them, big lads in those ridiculous bearskin hats, grabbed the man in the wheelchair. There he was, that's where he went. I found out later they grabbed him in his chair and they hauled him bodily through a side gap in the railing to cover behind a stone pillar. Dropped a drum doing it. Tripped. Got up. Kept going. Nobody filmed that. Nobody ever talks about it. But I think about those 2 lads more than I think about almost anything else from that day. Ordinary men. Terrified, probably, and they ran toward the thing in the worst moment because there was a person who couldn't run himself. I think that's the part of the human animal that doesn't get enough credit. We talk about the monsters. We always talk about the monsters. The men in the coats get the headlines. But there were 2 drummer boys and a small woman in a red coat, and they were the same square as the monsters, and they did not run away. By now the crowd had started to thin, not because it was safe, because people had finally found gaps. A side gate had been forced open. People were pouring through it into the gardens beyond, hundreds of them, a river of panic. Which was good. Which was the point. Every person who got through that gate was a person Elena no longer had to stand in front of. but it left her more exposed, not less. The thinner the crowd got behind her, the more clearly the remaining attackers could see her, and the harder she was working to keep their attention. She was advertising herself now, moving into open ground, making noise, drawing them in like a magician, keeping every eye on the wrong hand. I got back to my feet around then. I don't know why I didn't run. I've asked myself 100 times. I think part of me couldn't stop watching her, the way you can't look away from a fire even when it's burning your own house down. She was bleeding. I could see it now on her left arm, dark against the red tunic so you almost couldn't tell, except for the way it ran down to her fingers and dripped off them onto the pale stone. She'd been hit somewhere in there and I never even saw it happen. She certainly didn't act like it had happened. The arm still worked. The rifle still came up. She just kept going. There's a moment in this part, and the people who were there all agree on it, which is rare, because we agree on almost nothing else, where she stopped. Just for a second, maybe less. She'd put down another one, and there was this strange little pocket of quiet, the way there sometimes is in the middle of the worst noise, and she stood there in the open with the blood running off her hand, and she looked at the crowd streaming away through the side gate. She wasn't checking for the next threat, not in that second. She was checking on them, on the people, making sure they were getting out. I saw her face, same as before, not fear. Sad. And I finally understood the sad, I think, watching her in that pocket of quiet. It wasn't fear of dying. It was the opposite. It was the knowledge that she was probably going to, and that she was choosing to spend whatever seconds she had left standing in this spot, for these strangers, instead of running for the same gate they were running for. She could have gone, right then. The gap was right there. She could have gone with them and nobody on this earth would have blamed her. She didn't even look at the gate for herself. She turned back around to face the rest of them. I've put off telling this part for years. People ask me to tell the whole thing and I get them all the way here, right to the edge of it, and then I find some reason to stop. A drink of water, a phone call, anything. Because this is the part where I have to admit that for about 10 seconds I gave up. I decided she was going to lose. I decided we all were. And I was wrong. And the way I was wrong is the whole reason I still tell this story at all. So let me just say it. There was one of them left who was smarter than the rest. The others had come at her like bulls, straight on, angry, and one by one she dealt with them because a bull is easy when you're patient and they're not. This one wasn't a bull. He'd hung back the whole time, near the corner of a low wall, half hidden, watching her. I'd noticed him without noticing him, just a stillness in the corner of everything, a man who wasn't running and wasn't charging, just watching. Learning her, watching the way she moved, the way she chose her ground, the way she always put stone behind her targets. And he figured out the one thing she couldn't beat. He turned his weapon away from her. He pointed it at the crowd. Specifically, and I will never forgive him for the cleverness of it, never, he pointed it at the slowest part. The part still bottlenecked at the side gate. The old, the small, the ones who'd fallen and were being helped up. A little knot of maybe 20 people who hadn't gotten through yet. He'd done the math she'd been doing all morning, and he'd done it backwards. He knew she'd never fire toward the crowd. He knew her own discipline was the cage. So he stood where she couldn't shoot him without a clean background out in the open, with people behind him in every direction, and he aimed at the ones she was trying to save. And I understood in a cold rush exactly what he was doing. He was making her choose. Shoot and maybe hit the people behind him. Don't shoot and watch him hit the people in front of him. There was no answer. That's the thing. I've gone over it 1,000 times, every angle, every option, and there is no answer to it. It's a trap with no door. Whatever she did, people died. He'd built her a box and locked her inside it. That's when I gave up. God forgive me, that's when I looked away. But she didn't look away. I know what she did because the two drummer lads saw all of it, and a teenage girl filming on her phone caught most of it. And between them, I've stitched together the 10 seconds I was too much of a coward to watch. She didn't take the shot he wanted her to take. She didn't freeze either. She ran at him. Straight at him, across the open ground, closing the distance because she understood something he hadn't counted on. At 20 feet in a crowd, you can't take the shot. At 5 feet, you can. At 5 feet, there's no background problem, no angle problem, no math. At 5 feet, it's just two people, and the one who gets there first wins. So she gave up her cover, gave up the careful, disciplined, choose-your-ground fighting she'd done all morning, the only thing keeping her alive. She threw it all away, and she sprinted at an armed man across open stone, because it was the only way to take him without risking the crowd. She closed the distance. He turned the weapon back toward her, of course he did. Instinct, the obstacle was charging, and that was his mistake, that half-second of turning it off the crowd and onto her, and she'd known he would, she'd bet her life that he would. The girl's phone caught the end of it. I've only watched it once. I won't watch it again. Both of them fired. For a moment, neither of them moved. They stood there, the two of them, close enough to touch, the way you'd stand with someone you were about to embrace. The whole square seemed to hold its breath. Even the screaming dipped, just for a second, like the world itself had stopped to look. Then he fell. And she stayed standing. She stayed standing, but she was wrong somehow, tilted, swaying, the rifle hanging loose in her good hand. She'd been hit again. Worse this time. You could see it in how she stood, in the way her body had stopped being a tool she controlled and started being a weight she was holding up. The little knot of 20 people at the side gate, the ones he'd aimed at, the slow ones, the old ones, the fallen ones, every one of them was alive. Not one of them touched. They were already being pulled through the gate by the people on the other side, hands reaching back, dragging them to safety. They never knew. Most of them, to this day, have no idea how close it came. They don't know there was a man who'd chosen them specifically. They don't know a woman ran across open ground and traded her own body to keep his weapon off them for the 1 second it took to get them out. They just got home. That was the whole point of her. They just got home. She went down to one knee, then the other. And here's the part that I think about most, the part that I don't have a clean explanation for, the part that I'll be turning over until the day I die. She set the rifle down. She didn't drop it. She set it down carefully on the stone, the way you'd set down something you'd been trusted with. And then she looked up, and I'd gotten close by now. I'd run toward her like an idiot the second I saw her fall. I don't know what I thought I could do, and she looked up and she found my face in the crowd. Why mine? I don't know. I was just the water man. But she found me and she looked at me, and I swear to you she almost smiled. And she said one thing. She said, "Did they get out?" Not help me, not am I going to die, not is it over. Did they get out? I said yes. I said yes, they got out, all of them, you did it, they're safe. And she closed her eyes. The strangest thing about the worst day of your life is how quiet the end of it is. You'd think it would end loud. All that noise, all that screaming, all that tearing air, you'd think it would crash to a stop like a car hitting a wall. It didn't. It just sort of drained away. The screaming got farther off. The sirens got closer. Somewhere a phone was still playing music, tinny and bright and horrible, some pop song from a speaker no one would ever claim. And the smoke and the dust hung in that still, heavy August air with nowhere to go because there was no wind that day. There was never any wind that day. I was kneeling on the stone with my hands pressed against her arm, doing the thing you see people do in films, the thing I'd never done in my life. Pressing down hard on a wound to keep the blood in, and being absolutely no use at all. She'd stopped talking after "Did they get out?" But she was still breathing. I held on to that. I held on to every single breath like it was the last one, and then was so grateful when the next one came. The first responders reached us. I don't know how long it took. Time had stopped meaning anything. Hands pulled me back gently, but firmly, and people who actually knew what they were doing took my place, and I sat down hard on the wet stone among the rolled-away water bottles and I watched them work on her, and I started shaking so hard I couldn't make it stop. That's the part nobody warns you about. The shaking. It comes afterward when it's over, when you don't need to be brave anymore. Your body just files in its overdue terror all at once. They put her on a stretcher. They were fast. They were good. They carried her past me and I reached out, I don't know why, and I touched the edge of the stretcher just for a second like that meant something. And then she was gone, off through the gate she'd refused to walk through herself, and I never saw her again. 25. That's the number that ended up in every headline. One woman, a rifle, 25. They put it in big letters. They love that number. It does something to people. But I want to tell you what the number actually was, the one that mattered, the one nobody ever printed. 512. That's roughly how many people were packed against those railings that morning when the coats opened. 512 people who got to go home. Honeymooners. School kids in yellow caps. A man in a wheelchair with a flag taped to the armrest, who two terrified drummer boys dragged to safety. A little boy who'd been clapping off the beat on his father's shoulders, who is, I'm told, nearly grown now, and who has no memory of that day at all, which is the kindest thing I can imagine. 25 is the number they counted of the ones who came to do harm. 512 is the number she was actually fighting for. I wish they'd print that number. I wish that was the one in the big letters, but it doesn't fit on a headline the same way, does it? It doesn't give you that little cold thrill. Saving 500 people isn't as exciting to read about as the math of how the saving got done. People are strange like that. We're drawn to the count of the lost. We have to be reminded every time to look at who's still standing. She lived. I want to say that plainly because I've drawn it out, and I've made you sit in the worst of it, and that's not fair to do for too long. She lived. It was a near thing, a very near thing by every account. She spent a long time in a hospital, longer in recovery, and there are things her body doesn't do as well as it used to, and there are nights, I'm told, that are hard for her in ways that have nothing to do with her body. That's the cost nobody puts in the headlines, the part she saw coming in that one sad look before she ever fired the first shot. You don't do a thing like that and walk away the same person. You carry it. All of it. The ones you saved and the ones you couldn't, and the faces of the men you had to stop, and the sound the square made when it became one screaming animal. You carry all of it forever quietly, while everyone else gets to forget. That's the real price of being the one who runs toward it. I met her once more, not at the palace. Years later, by accident, in the most ordinary place in the world, a supermarket of all things, both of us standing in front of the same shelf. I knew her immediately. You don't forget a face you watch do that. She didn't know me at all. Why would she? I was just a man in a crowd of 500, just the water man. I didn't tell her who I was. I almost did. I had it all ready, the whole speech, everything I'd wanted to say for years. You looked at me. You asked if they got out. I told you yes. They did, every one of them, and I've thought about you every single day since. But she was just buying her shopping. Just a small woman, smaller than you'd expect, reaching for something on a shelf, having an ordinary afternoon she had every right to. So I just said, "Excuse me, can you reach that for me? Some tin on the top shelf." And she did. She handed it to me and she smiled, an ordinary smile, the smile of a stranger being briefly kind to another stranger. And I said thank you. And I meant it more than I have ever meant anything in my life. People always ask me what the lesson is. They want me to tie it up. They want the meaning, the moral, the thing they can repeat to someone else. I don't have one for them. I'm just the water man. I don't know what it all means. But I know this. They called for help that day. Hundreds of them in their own way, not with words. Most of them never even got the chance to scream. But the way a crowd calls for help just by being there, frightened, cornered, hopping somebody, anybody, will stand between them and the worst thing in the world. And what arrived wasn't an army. It was one tired woman who'd been standing still for 2 hours in the heat, who could have run with everyone else, who chose not to, who set her rifle down so gently at the end like it was something she'd been trusted with and was giving back. 500 people went home that day. And not one of them, reaching for a tin on a high shelf in some supermarket years later, would ever guess that the small woman who handed it to them was the only reason they were still alive to want it. That's the part I can't get over, not the noise, not the number. The quiet of it after. The fact that the bravest person I ever saw just went back to being ordinary and let us all forget, so that we could go on living the lives she'd handed back to us. I never forgot. I never will.